I'm now reading UK's Cameron tells Devils he can keep Britain in the EU. Prime Minister David Cameron said on Friday he was confident he could renegotiate Britain's relations with the European Union to allow it to remain in the 28-nation bloc. In some of his most pro-European remarks to date, Cameron told the World Economic Forum in Davos that changes needed to make the Eurozone function better mean the EU would need to alter its treaties. That would give Britain an opportunity to recalibrate its own relations with the EU. That would give. I am confident that we'll have a successful renegotiation and a successful referendum, Cameron told delegates, referring to his plan to reshape his country's EU ties before offering Britons an in or out referendum if his Conservative Party is re-elected next year. I'm confident that we'll have a successful renegotiation and a successful referendum, Cameron told delegates, referring to his plan to reshape his country's EU ties before offering Britons an in or out referendum if his Conservative Party is re-elected next year. I'm confident this is doable, deliverable, and, as I say, winnable for Britain to stay in a reformed European Union. Cameron is under pressure from the anti-EU UK Independence Party, also known as the UKIP, and from Eurosceptic lawmakers in his own party, ahead of elections to the European Parliament in May and the national election next year. He is also mindful of public opinion, with recent polls showing a slim majority of Britons would vote to leave the EU if given the chance, because they are fed up with what they see as its overbearing role in everyday life. However, swaths of big business have expressed concern about the prospect of leaving the bloc, where many would make Britain a less attractive place to do business, while officials in Brussels have said Britain's influence in the world will be diluted. The country's EU partners have also played down the chances of London being able to renegotiate terms with the bloc. Amid accusations, London is trying to cherry-pick its way to a new relationship at the expense of other member states. Cameron said Britain and the West had an opportunity to boost their economic fortunes by luring back jobs and factories from Asia if they got the regulatory environment right. Rising costs in Asia and the need to react more quickly to changing consumer demands means companies found the prospect of relocating jobs and services back to their home countries attractive, he said. For years, the West has been written off. People said that we are facing some sort of inevitable decline. They say we can't make anything anymore, he said. I don't believe it has to be this way. If we make the right decisions, we may also see more of what has been a small but discernible trend, where some jobs that were once offshore are coming back from east to west. In particular, he asked the EU not to over-regulate when it came to shale gas, saying it held out the prospect of cheaper energy that would give firms another possible reason to relocate from Asia. A UK government push for shale gas development has met with strong opposition from local communities and environmentalists to the hydraulic fracturing process used to extract the gas. I'm now reading Fear and Ignorance Fuel Spread of Leprosy in Africa. Although sits on a hospital bed in Senegal, his left leg stretched the length of the mattress, the right one amputated below the knee, afflicted by recurrent yet mysterious sores. He had done the rounds of traditional practitioners and physicians who prescribed him various plants and potions who were unable to tell him he had leprosy. I didn't know anything about the disease. The 32-year-old street peddler from central Senegal tells AFP in his native language, Wolof. Story typifies the experience of many patients who one day notice an innocuous, painless blemish on their skin, and later discover they have leprosy, a condition which is easy to combat, yet which continues to cripple and exclude millions worldwide. When Gaye was finally diagnosed, the young father was lucky to receive care from the Hospital of the Order of Malta, also known as HOM, a medical facility in the capital Dakar at the forefront of treatment of the disease. But it was too late to save his right leg, the bone already too badly damaged. Leprosy, transmitted most effectively in overcrowded conditions with poor sanitation, afflicts the poorest, the most vulnerable, says Dr. Charles Chief Medical Officer at HOM, which provides free care for the destitute. They often wait until the last minute to be seen, laments the orthopedic surgeon. Yet a bacterial illness can be easily cured before it causes serious damage. Multi-drug therapy, MDT, available free of charge through the World Health Organization since the 1980s, consists of free antibiotics which together can cure patients in a few months. But often those afflicted with leprosy do not know how to spot the signs early on, and the disease takes an insidious hold, attacking nerve endings, destroying the ability to feel pain and injury. Over 200,000 new cases a year. They burn themselves holding a hot pan or injure their feet walking on grass, for example, and do not realize. Unable to sense these injuries, patients are susceptible to sores and infections which can eventually lead to the loss of fingers, hands, toes, and feet, blindness, and facial disfigurement. People with leprosy are isolated, kept remote. People don't touch them. People say they are cursed. Says, a 33-year-old teacher who has been receiving treatment for nearly 2 years. Women sometimes hide the illness for fear of being rejected by their husbands. Organizations dealing with the leprosy combat prejudice through education, hammering home the message that leprosy is not hereditary, nor a sign of a divine curse. They point out that 95% of humans are actually naturally immune to what campaigners call the world's least contagious communicable disease. Treated in 1976 and cured permanently, 60-year-old Montespa stayed at HOM, and now manufactures shoes for those crippled by leprosy. When they put them on, first they walk, then they dance with joy, he says proudly. Between 200 and 300 new cases of leprosy are reported each year in Senegal, but doctors believe that only a small proportion of patients are detected. If nothing is done, we can expect an increase in prevalence, warns Professor Charles of HOM. Considerable progress has been made in the fight against leprosy, but it remains present in more than 100 countries in Africa, America, Asia, and the Pacific. World Leprosy Day, a period of 3 days, in fact, aimed at raising awareness of the disease, begins on Friday, and organizers hope to communicate the message that, despite more than 200,000 new cases being detected in 2012, it can be eradicated. I'm now reading UN urges Myanmar to probe sectarian killings. The United Nations has called on Myanmar to investigate reports that dozens of men, women, and children were killed in attacks on Muslims with the alleged involvement of police. The UN said it had received credible information of a series of attacks in a remote area of strife-torn state earlier this month. In a latest statement of international concern over the fresh bouts of unrest, whose sweeping political reforms have been overshadowed by religious bloodshed, has vociferously denied civilians were killed, but said a police officer was presumed dead after a crash. I deplore the loss of life in DU year and call on the authorities to carry out the full, prompt, and impartial investigation and ensure that victims and their families receive justice. The UN's Human Rights Chief said in a statement late Thursday. The UN said it had information that 8 Muslim men were attacked and killed in a village near the border with by local on January 9th. 4 days later, a police sergeant in the same village was captured and killed by This in turn prompted police and local to kill at least 40 Muslim men, women and children the same evening, the statement said, adding that the UN had passed on the information it had received to the government. Presidential spokesman described the UN statement as regrettable and based on groundless sources. Because of these acts, mistrust and concern can increase in state, and trust in the UN organizations among local residents can decrease, he told AFP. Western state remains tense after several outbreaks of intercommunal violence between Buddhist and Buddhist and Muslim communities since 2012 that have killed scores and displaced 140,000 people, mainly from the minority. The area where the latest violence is believed to have taken place is mainly populated by the stateless whose movements are strictly controlled by a heavy security presence. Aid group Doctors Without Borders (MSF), one of the few outside organizations permitted to operate in the region, said it had treated at least 22 patients with injuries believed to be from violence in the village on January 14th, mostly from knife wounds, but also one gunshot victim. Activists said shortly after the January 13 attack that at least 2 women and a child were stabbed to death in the village, with possibly several dozen casualties. Both the United States and Britain have raised alarm over the reports of the violence. Official discrimination. British Foreign Secretary William Hague said on his official Twitter account that he was sickened by reports that women and children had been killed. New York-based Human Rights Watch said it had received information that police had authorized the arrest of all men and boys over the age of 10 in the area. It said initial denial of civilian casualties suggested reports of unrest were not being taken seriously. Official discrimination against the population and impunity for past abuses has created a fertile ground for new atrocities to take place, said HRW Deputy Asia Director Phil Robertson. His government considers the estimated 800,000 in the country to be foreigners, while many citizens see them as illegal immigrants from and view them with hostility. 2 rounds of arrests in state in June and October 2012, largely between local Buddhist and the Muslim minority, sparked religious unrest that has since spread across the country, leaving some 250 people dead. Has been left almost completely segregated on religious and communal grounds by the unrest, with many thousands of Muslims living in squalid camps nearly 2 years after being displaced. Thousands of asylum seekers have fled in rickety and overcrowded boats trying to reach and further afield, with scores dying at sea. Government has sought to emerge from decades of junta-imposed isolation, with sweeping political and economic reforms since taking power in 2011. The country this month began its first international political role in decades as chair of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also known as ASEAN. Now reading U.S. military sees risks. U.S. military sees risks in China-Japan tensions seeks restraint. The top U.S. military commander over entrenched tensions between Japan and China, a day after Japan's Prime Minister evoked comparisons to Britain and Germany before World War I. Admiral Samuel Locklear, the head of the U.S. military's Pacific Command, said the role of the United States was to keep encouraging restraint, professionalism, and hope there will be diplomatic dialogue and a solution to this. I am concerned, told a briefing after being asked to assess the tensions between Japan and China and the risk of conflict. Anytime you have two large powers, two large economic powers, two large military powers that have a disagreement that they are not talking to each other about, that has no clear diplomatic and state in sight, the risk calculation can grow. Sino-Japanese ties, long plagued by what Beijing sees as Japan's failure to atone for its occupation of parts of China in the 1930s and 1940s, have worsened recently due in part to a territorial dispute in the East China Sea, where China declared an air defense zone where China declared an air defense zone late. Where China declared an air defense zone late last year. Ties have also suffered because of Tokyo's mistrust of Beijing's military build-up and Japanese Prime Minister December visit to a shrine that critics say glorifies Japan's wartime past. Said on Wednesday that Japan and China should avoid repeating the past mistakes of Britain and Germany, which fought in World War I despite strong economic ties, according to his main government spokesman in Tokyo. China and Japan, the world's second and third largest economies respectively, have deep business ties and bilateral trade worth nearly $334 billion in 2012, according to Japanese figures. The U.S. military's ability to quickly defuse a crisis in the East China Sea is unclear. The Locklear said he did not have a hotline to his counterpart in China's People's Liberation Army. I don't have the ability to pick up the phone and talk directly to a PLA or PLA Navy admiral or general at the time of crisis, and we need to work on that. Locklear said.